Hi everyone, my name is Jang here at Carnegie Mellon School of Computer Science, presenting our work, It's the Only Thing I Can Trust, Envisioning Large Language Model Use by Autistic Workers for Social Communication Assistance. This is work that I did in collaboration with my co-authors Sanika Moharana, Patrick Carrington, and Andrew Begel, all also from Carnegie Mellon University. This work originally began with some of us noticing that alongside the overall popularity of LLMs like ChatGPT, Copilot, and Gemini, that social media users in autism-allied spaces were posting about how the LLMs could give advice about how to communicate to coworkers and their managers. We wanted to explore the opportunity and risks associated with using LLMs as a communication support tool. At a high level, we believe that this paper is worth your attention as one of the first works exploring using large language models as a support tool for autistic workers. From our study, we believe that it is likely that many autistic workers have already or will imminently begin to use LLMs for social communication advice, as it is likely to be viewed as better or more accessible than existing options. However, based on our analysis with assistance from a job coach, we believe that LLM advice is often flawed and displaying ableist, employer-centric language, and with a critical concern that these attributes may not be appreciated by the autistic workers who seek the advice. We believe that creating the right LLM response or fixing the LLM so that it behaves correctly is a wicked problem. But this is not to say that there are no ways forward. In our work, we highlight a variety of different perspectives in the field of HCI, which we believe may be valuable for systems builders and other researchers in inquiring about questions like, whose perspective should the LLM represent, and why? We hope that this work spurs people to ask and tackle these kinds of questions directly. Given the fact that we've seen rising numbers of self-identified autistic adults reporting on their experiences for using it for work, we aim to answer the following questions. First, what communication challenges and resource availabilities do autistic workers experience? Second, do autistic workers believe that an LLM's advice could be helpful for addressing workplace communication challenges? 3. Can an LLM's advice be considered good, and in what sense of good? And to try to answer these questions, we designed a mixed method study with deception where we conducted an interview and intervention study in 3 parts. In the first, the pre-interview, we asked autistic participants in a semi-structured interview about their current needs with respect to social communication at work, and how it is or isn't being met, and what resources they were utilizing to meet their needs. In the intervention, we asked them to interact with an LLM and human, and asked them to compare both agents' social advice. We administered a Likert scale survey as well as a qualitative survey to obtain participant opinions during the sessions. We followed this up with a post-interview to ask them about their feedback about their overall experiences and for comparisons between the 2 agents. During the intervention, participants interacted with 2 chatbot agents, PaprikaBot and PepperBot. They were encouraged to ask a question that they had previously had about their work experiences. As for the agents, PaprikaBot was a Discord bot which interfaced with OpenAI's GPT-4 model via the API, and it was slightly fine-tuned to only respond to workplace communication-related messages. The other agent, PepperBot, was a human confederate who acted as a basis for comparison for the LLM. Participants had 4 short burst interactions of 10 minutes or less, which each interaction consisted of a series of questions about a topic. Crucially, we informed participants initially that both agents were automated. This was done to isolate feedback about advice itself from participants, without concerns that they would feel judgmental about another person. At the conclusion of each session, we administered a survey containing a few Likert scale questions which we'll expound upon later, as well as long-form answer questions asking about feedback about both agents. For more details on the study design, including details on prompting for the model, we encourage you to look at the full paper manuscript. For the intervention, participants were logged into a Discord server where they interacted with both agents, and they asked workplace questions that they had previously had. We recruited 11 participants who self-identified as being autistic and had 3 months of full-time work experience. Our participants had a wide range of work experience, with some not currently employed, some in entry-level positions, and some in very much specialist roles, such as a lab manager and postdoc. We report some fraction of our findings of our qualitative data here. In particular, we highlight participants' attitudes toward the LLM, which were overall largely favorable. Participants really liked the fact that the LLM was capable of generating very well-structured, formatted, and step-by-step advice for handling social situations, and for its willingness to go in whatever level of detail the user desired. Participants were generally quick to note that they could not expect this from any of their current resources. Participants in general enjoyed it when the LLM assumed context and tended not to question whether what the user suggested was a good idea or not. This was in contrast to a human confederate who tended to not respond with advice until they felt like they had sufficient context and tended to aim more toward a middle ground for advice. The LLM's advice seemed good or applicable enough without the back and forth of acquiring context made participants feel like the LLM better understood them from the jump. Participants also really enjoyed that the LLM explained, quote, obvious, and quote, neurotypical normative conventions in detail. What participants disliked about the LLMs were potential privacy concerns which could result from LLMs into workplace communication software, such as an integration with one's work Slack. There, participants expressed concern that private questions may be eavesdropped on, or that inadvertent disclosure may occur. Participants also noticed that the LLM gave advice which assumed that they were neurotypical, and gave advice which simply wouldn't work for them, such as, quote, go talk to lots of different people, end quote, or, quote, meeting people at a big conference is a great idea, end quote. We had a lot of participant feedback which echoed very much the sentiment in this quote. We had participant 10 saying, I think this touches on exactly what I want. You're like, wow, because you've been living in a vacuum or a desert. This is like that oasis. In many cases, the experiences that participants had with the LLM represented ones which held far more promise than the status quo. For our quantitative data, when we conducted a two-tailed Mann-Whitney U side rank test between mean participant scores amongst the two groups from the Likert scale survey, each one gave back a p-value far below the 0.05 significance level, confirming scores for the LLM on all four qualities were statistically significantly higher than those for the human. And in the survey, we tested for qualities such as utility, understanding, intent to use, and dependability. Representing the data in bar chart form, we're working with a 7-point Likert scale, so we have a min of 1 and a max of 7. We can see how distinct the differences are visually. The blue bar indicates mean scores for the human confederate, while the red bar represents mean ratings for the LLM. We note that our human confederate scored at or slightly above the middle of the scale at 4, indicating that they served as a good baseline comparison for the LLM. We have the following overall takeaways from our qualitative and quantitative data. Please check the full manuscript for more in-depth analysis and insights. Our top-level findings were 1. That our participants highlighted the critical lack of available resources at their various workplace experiences, echoing much of the findings from previous research. 2. Our participants displayed a strong, in both qualitative and quantitative preference for LLMs. This extended not only against their human confederate, but also to a general use case when we asked participants to reflect on whether they would utilize something in their current situation. In fact, 9 out of 11 participants responded in the affirmative that they would like to continue using the LLM. Participants had a strong affinity for the way the LLM spoke to them through step-by-step instructions and more verbose, detailed explanations. While meeting with participants gave us a lot of information, we also wanted to understand where this advice would compare with what you would get with job coaching or counseling advice. To achieve this, we collaborated with a coach specializing in job placement for autistic college students here on Carnegie Mellon's campus and sought their evaluation of participant conversations with the LLM. Our job coach noted 1. A similarity to advice from the LLM to ones that they would give in practice. 2. Defaulting to neurotypical assumptions even after one had disclosed one's autism. 3. A sort of general blurring of employer and user-centered advice, such as when the LLM advised that the participant should consider their obligation to their employer. And 4. A tendency to be overly optimistic when giving guidance for social situations. While our coach stressed the importance of a near real-time solution, they threw some concern about the LLM's tendency to assume context, as this could lead to instances where a user takes ungrounded advice at face value, attempts it, and faces negative consequences. One example from our participant sessions was where an individual asked for advice with approaching a meeting about a salary raise, and the LLM assumed that the individual and their manager were on good terms, and that the individual could be in for social consequences if this were not actually the case. This assumption of context leads us to our discussion topic, where we wanted to illustrate how this exact issue hits on critical schisms in the current landscape of accessibility and broadly HCI literature. In doing so, we hope to expose future systems builders toward the variety of viewpoints and perspectives that are out there. In particular, we highlight the earlier reference to our finding that LLMs tend to assume the context and ask you fewer clarification questions. This leads to a situation where autistic users actually said that they would like to use LLMs because it assumes their context and does what it asks them to do. But given that exact quality, we see practitioners urging caution against using LLMs as it may lead to potentially catastrophic consequences at work from ungrounded assumptions. Many strains of HCI literature and perspectives have something to say here. We'll quickly introduce a few. We'll first start with standpoint theory, which is a perspective that emphasizes the importance of centering individual perspectives and experiences. To this, we reach to works like those from Barzell and Barzell and Lucy Suchman. Critical disability theory, and relatedly disability studies, much like other critical perspectives, challenges existing power structures and narratives about disability, and seeks to amplify and enable the voices of experiences of disabled individuals. While there are many works to draw from here, we highlight Mankoff et al.'s Disability Studies as a source of critical inquiry for the field of assistive technology from 2010, and Williams et al.'s Counterventions paper from 2023. We also introduced the medical model of disability and the counterpart, the social model. The medical model views disability as something that an individual tackles for themselves, and generally advocates for using existing medicalized structures such as therapy or counseling. The social model of disability, however, sees disability as a societal issue, caused by barriers and attitudes within society, and not necessarily an individual condition. Let's use a concrete example to show how complicated this discussion can be and involves all of these viewpoints. Say that our user is an autistic individual who's having difficulty with their entry-level position as their workplace doesn't provide accommodations. They also don't have a great relationship with their manager. They question whether they should stay at their job. They go to the LLM and say, "Here's my situation. I think I want to quit my job. How do I communicate my frustrations to my manager and the company?" So the question is, how should the LLM respond? Recall the context that many autistic individuals don't have alternative resources to balance out advice from an LLM, and the stakes grow higher. So our overall takeaway is this. Our work engages on the question, whose perspective should LLMs privilege? We believe that this question and our results to support the inquiry of this question offers to add and guide to the discussion around uses of LLMs for social advice in mental health and therapy, particularly for other minoritized groups such as the elderly and LGBTQ+ populations. Before I end, I want to genuinely thank my collaborators for this project, Sanika, Patrick, and Andy. They've been incredibly supportive, and we're really thrilled to share this work to a broader audience. I also want to give my deepest gratitude toward the peoples whose names are also on the slides. And to wrap up, we thought it would be good to reiterate the contributions of this work. First, we illuminate emergent practices for social communication advice by autistic workers. Second, we ran a study with autistic participants who compared an LLM and a disguised human's advice, and we subsequently reviewed the LLM response with a trained professional job coach. Third, we discuss immediate consequences of LLM use by autistic workers in a social communication context, and present design considerations for how to move forward. For more detail on all of the above, please consult the paper manuscript in the CHI 2024 conference proceedings. Thank you for listening.